Hello, everyone. This is Pedro Romero, and I'm back at it again with a brand new interview. This time for my YouTube channel. It's been a long time since I've done a video interview with anyone within the esports space, but having done so many written pieces, I feel it's time to get back to making content for my YouTube channel. And so, what better way to do that than to have someone who's very recognizable within the Valorant space? And as for who that person is, it's none other than Wyatt River. He's a talent, analyst, host, commentator. The man can do it all within this game for the past 2 or 3 years. And so, Wyatt, thank you so much for taking the time to doing this interview. I really appreciate it. And just to start off, a cliche kind of question, but how are you doing at this moment in time?
Good. Yeah, things have been good. It was a couple months ago at the beginning of April that while I was in Los Angeles for the VCT Americas circuit, that myself and Bren had gotten into a really bad car crash while we were passengers in an Uber. So, um, yeah, that was rough. I'd gotten knocked out on impact and was recovering from a really bad concussion for a couple months, and then I was able to come back for that last week of the VCT Americas playoffs, and after that had concluded, and I had come home. I had no involvement with VCT Tokyo. I've really just been taking the time to enjoy the other aspects of life a bit. Essentially, that entire month of Tokyo, just trying to, I guess go out, do different things, not be so focused on work as I had been for the majority of the year up until that point. And now things are kind of getting back in the swing of productivity. With like Plat Chat is starting up again after Tokyo's concluded, and LCQ coming up. Working on the analyst desk for that again, so kind of slipping back into work mode, refocusing on Valorant, but I enjoyed having a month post recovery to, yeah, just enjoy the other aspects of life. So, but yeah, overall, I mean, I'm feeling way better and things are good.
Yeah, and as you mentioned over as to how busy it has been for you right before that unfortunate accident. So, what are the kind of things that you've been focusing on that helped you get away from that rough work schedule and just helped you relax and just recover and reset both mentally and physically?
Yeah, I I think compared to a lot of the other people that are in the same space as me, I spend a lot more time enjoying my privacy. Like when I'm not doing Plat Chat, when I'm not doing my own content or I'm not appearing on other streams, I do really like to go in the exact opposite direction and turn everything off and just have my privacy. Whether that be simple things like I enjoy just kind of relaxing with my with my plants and candles and just kind of I love watching wrestling or just uh going out. I like going out into nature, going to parks, relaxing in that way. I'm very passionate about clothing and the clothing scene in Austin, and I have sort of a separate group of friends there. And so, it's just in trying to engage in my other passions outside of gaming is the way that I do that.
And I do say so, I am gonna be honest when I say that you do look pretty stylish in all of the or in the majority or in the recent string of events that you've been covering, be it wherever event it may be. You look pretty stylish, way more stylish than I will ever be, and I'll be honest about that as well, for real. Um, Wrestling, you mentioned a little bit about wrestling. Do you have a favorite wrestler?
Uh, yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. At the moment, I do really like Cody Rhodes, and I have this silly challenge for myself where because I mean it's kind of obvious, but because I also have the bleach blonde hair and
Mm.
uh I was really bad about exercising last year. So I've been going hard again this year. I had a couple months where I couldn't, but I'm going hard again because I'm the same height as him, same build. So I'm trying to get to the same weight as him so I can be him for Halloween, which is my like silly fitness goal for this year. But yeah, at the moment, he's definitely my favorite.
You got to, or you make sure you're gonna get that tattoo of the
Oh
American
yeah,
Nightmare.
100%. I already looked that up. You can get the whatever like removable one, or like wash off whatever it is. So yeah, gonna go all out if I can get
Hmm.
there.
When did you start watching wrestling? Like when did that first come about?
Just this year, I got
Really?
so obsessed with it. Yeah, I think it's it might be this like a subconscious infiltration from being around Golden Boy so much
Hmm.
because he is obsessed with it. And then at some point, yeah, like right at the beginning of this year, I just somehow it started getting in my YouTube algorithm, and I'd never watched it before in my life. I was never exposed to it as a kid, nothing like that. And I just got immediately hooked, and it's just become such an obsession for me now. Um, and yeah, it's I love, like I said, I love engaging with it to get away from everything else. It's a nice, relaxing time. I look forward to like watching Raw and SmackDown every week, and yeah, it's just been a nice way for me to get away from everything. And I definitely have a tendency to get hyper fixated on things and
Yeah.
overly obsessed, and that has definitely been it so far for me this year.
I feel like I had that kind of similar phase back then when I first paid attention to WWE also because I also was a WWE fan and a big one as well. One might say someone who was equally as passionate as you are right now. That was like circa '05, '03. And that point I was like less than 10 years old. And so I at that point John Cena wasn't already an established legend at that moment in time. He was just a rookie and he was fighting alongside the likes of the Undertaker, Young Undertaker, some other wrestlers that you don't know of, Eddie Guerrero, Goldberg, maybe a little bit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that Goldberg.
Yeah, I've gone back in the history books as well. I've been like watching all the current stuff, and then in my free time going back and watching all the historical stuff. Yeah, just full on diving in, obsessed.
Yeah, for real, for real. And um, one more quick question about that. You got a favorite match? What's your favorite match from so far in your perspective of WWE?
I'll go with a favorite match that I've actually watched myself live. Damn, that is tough. Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania was amazing. Um, Let me think. Um, at Backlash, funny enough, the match between Damian Priest and Bad Bunny was amazing. And then I think I'll throw in one more. I think Sami Zayn versus Roman Reigns at Elimination Chamber. I think those have probably been my favorite three so far this year.
Oh, for real, they're definitely great matches when it comes to the crowd engagement and the electricity, and it's especially that Backlash one, the one that was held in Puerto Rico. It was the first time in 18 years that an event was taking place in that island. Last one being New Year's Revolution. I'm showing you my history of that of WWE. So, but a recommendation match. I don't know if you've seen this one, but it's CM Punk versus the John Cena 2011 Money in the Bank. I'm pretty sure you know about this match, but I'm not sure if you actually seen it.
I haven't seen it yet. Golden Boy also told me that that was a must-watch match. So now that two people have told me that's a must-watch, I definitely have to go back and see it at some point.
Yeah, because at that point WWE was not really at its best quality wise, but with that match, it it kickstarted a lot of things. Not only did it kickstart CM Punk's main event status ish in WWE, but it also ushered in a new era of the company. So just a quick little recommendation on that for you to watch. So um, there you go. And so, rewinding from our WWE talk, I want to capture your thoughts as to what that work regimen was like before that accident, and you were being as focused and as diligent and as busy as you were. What kind of struggles were you experiencing at that time that enabled you to just realize, hey, this is not going right. I gotta make sure I gotta hit the reset button. What was that mentality like at that time?
Yeah, at the end of last year, I was I was experiencing some extreme burnout from Valorant. The last year was, at least career wise, was really tough. It felt like it was just um, uh, loss after loss after loss. Nothing was really going right, and I had also began losing the passion for the independent ventures that I was in. Specifically, I spent so much time co-streaming, and the fire burning for that that I had maybe the previous year, 2021. Last year was just totally gone, and it ended up being essentially the only thing that I could rely on in Valorant, and having only that was tough as time went on. And then it was at the end of last year and then early into this year, well, I began speaking with Riot about joining the broadcast for VCT Americas this year. I was a bit apprehensive, but the opportunity was definitely too good to pass up. And so I had spent so much time away from Valorant the last few months of 2022 that I felt like I had to just start reintegrating myself and getting serious about watching all the games again, doing the proper amount of studying, um, and getting back in touch with the scene that I was so in tune with everything. I just had to get back to that same place, and that took a lot of effort at the beginning of this year. Um, and all the while I was still doing the Plat Chat podcast weekly, but I had taken more of a hosting role at the time, which I was to some extent doing because I didn't have to be as focused on Valorant, and I could just be more focused on trying to direct the show and be the conductor and set everyone else up to actually do the um, opinionated discussion of the game and the scene. And so mostly for me, I guess, sorry, kind of going off the path, but to reiterate, I think most of the effort that I was putting in at the top of this year, previous to VCT Americas, was getting reacclimated and getting back into the mental space that I was in for all the time previously in Valorant, where I was just so obsessed.
Mhm. And you mentioned about loss after loss after loss. What did you mean by that? Can you elaborate as to what that meant for you? Because obviously that doesn't mean competitively speaking, right? Or does it?
It didn't have anything to do with literal competition. Well, I
Hmm.
suppose it's how you look at it. But at the beginning of 2022, I had spent a couple months in serious talks with 100 Thieves to be the general manager for their Valorant roster, heading into the year when they had put together that team with Eccles, Baby J, Hiko, Ethan, and Asuna, and it was a complete meltdown. And so I was kind of coming in to help them, and I had spent a couple months reforming or reformulating rather
Mm.
how that roster could be approached and their mentality for roster building in the future. Kind of pointing them in the direction of certain players that I wanted, some of which ended up on the team. Um, and then I haven't really. I mean, I've definitely. I think some people have kind of picked up the subtext of what's happened there, and I've never really spoken clearly about what that situation ended up turning into. And frankly, I don't have any desire to at any point. I I just don't really want it to be a rehashed big deal. I don't really want the attention from it, negative or positive. It just doesn't feel necessary to me. Um, and also, I really like the players on that team. Mike, the coach, is my real friend, and I'm super supportive of them, and I want them to be the absolute best that they can. And um, for that reason, for my desire to not have the attention from it at all, I've abstained from seriously talking about that. I'll make like a joke here or there on the podcast, but I never go into to too much explicit detail. And then after that had happened, so I had stopped being on Plat Chat for the first few months of the year when that
Mhm,
was going on, um, and then I had started returning after that. But also while that was going on, that was fresh off me being serious about co-streaming the previous year, and that
mhm,
was when I was getting my peak viewership on Twitch, and that was a huge amount of my income. At the same time, Platchat was doing the couch code streams, and it was so much more active because the other members of the Platchat crew weren't in the talent space yet.
mhm,
Um, so then as the year went on, stuff with Platchat slowed down. We stopped doing the couch streams because Bren, Josh, Bala, Mimi were all
mhm.
working the main broadcast, and Avast was working with the organization Misfits and still is. And so that just became less of a priority for everybody
Mhm.
except for myself and Kurt, the producer. And then later in the year, he ended up getting hired to be a producer for Riot as well. And so I ended up in this position where I was, feeling very left out of all of that, despite having, felt like I could have. I think I earned a shot at something like that, given how long I'd been in the game, involved in the esports side of the game, rather. The content that I had done, being on the being on Platchat since the beginning, the status of my co-streaming, and so it was a bit. It was disheartening to never really get a shot, and then right at the end of the year, there was, I believe it was during the LCQ, I got really frustrated because I had done a bit on my stream that they just did on the broadcast the next day and gave me a shout out, and I didn't think that that was right. And then the following event, Champions, they uh, I wasn't able to co-stream that, or they didn't give me co-streaming, which was also very frustrating because up until that point, we had co-streamed every event with Plat Chat. I co-streamed every other event I could, and it just made me feel like I had no place in the game anymore. I wasn't really sure where I was headed, um, and so at that point, that was about 8 or 9 months into the year, and heading off that is what I was describing earlier. Those few months of feeling like I might be done with this because I don't really
Mhm.
see where the future lies. Despite Platchat being successful, there was no, there was no like it wasn't making anyone a living.
Mhm.
So I was unsure what I could do in the game to actually make a living and stay in it because it felt at that point like I needed to do something else and that I didn't have a place in the scene.
Yeah, then of course, with the existence of Platchat and it being a platform for talents such as yourself and also your colleagues that you mentioned, that being the platform that springboarded them to getting jobs in events, in actual events, in actual broadcasts. For you to have seen that, but then not get called up yourself, I guess that was the kind of like the main force behind you, like feeling disillusioned and also feeling I don't want to say pressure, but like stressed out. Was that what would that be like the main catalyst behind the issues that carried forward from last year up until this year?
Yeah, 100%. It was definitely stressful, and I was experiencing a lot of burnout at that point because all I was doing was co-streaming, and at some point I think there's a very limited cap on what you can do creatively with co-streaming, and I definitely felt a desire to do more than just that, and it was becoming so oversaturated, and those two things really burned me out of co-streaming and my desire to do that. And yeah, at the same time, like I said, I was disheartened because I hadn't gotten uh, no other opportunities had really come up for me in the game. The two directions I saw for myself, if I were to have some kind of career in Valorant, were to GM a roster, which I had that opportunity with 100 Thieves, and then after that, I've never been reached out to again. And then or doing something on the talent side, and then just never got a shot there. And so, yeah, it was very disheartening. And with co-streaming being the the path that I'd followed throughout that entire time, but feeling the extreme burnout from that as well. It was all of that that culminated into um, just a feeling of apathy towards the game.
But I guess now, given that you've now been able to work in these broadcasts this year, although it was as little as of this point right now, I guess it sort of alleviated you from those issues, or are they still present in your mind, given that you haven't done a lot of work, and that then leads to you still having that feeling of you having to prove yourself, that you do actually belong. Does that a feeling still linger with you this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely given me a chip on my shoulder. Um, and it's at certain points, I think there will always be some level of burnout because you are so, and everyone is in this space, so extremely dedicated to the craft and to the game. And I think burnout is inevitable because of that, whether you're a pro player, whether you're talent, whatever the case may be. You just have to spend so much time on that. But yeah, there are certainly aspects of my life that has helped alleviate a lot of stress from. Specifically, what am I going to do with my life to make a living? I mean, that was a major problem, because committed so much. I had committed all my time to the game, and it was tough to make a living, even as just a decently sized co-streamer. And so, dealing with the stress of that while, um, you know, struggling to find a place in the scene was uh, certainly the root cause of a lot of anxiety that's been alleviated by being able to be a part of the broadcast team this year for sure.
And of course, and you alluded to your past and how that has helped, not really, well, helped, yes, and helped shaped you, the kind of person that you are as of this current moment in time. And I want to dive into that, into your past, and specifically I want to dive into your days as a pro TF2 player. And I mean, before you were known by the Valorant community as Wyatt, you were Myla. You were Myla within the TF2 scene, playing from like mid 2000s up until you retired around 2017, 2018. You can correct me on that whenever you can. And so, uh, when it comes to playing in TF2, talk to me about what that scene was like back then, and and how did you navigate through it, and also how did you excuse me, how did you enter into that scene in that game at that time?
Yeah, so I started playing TF2 competitively at the lowest levels in 2011 or 12, around then. Um, it started because I was so obsessed with the game. I loved TF2 so much. From the first time I remember playing it at my friend's house, I can see it very vividly. I remember playing on CP Orange X3, which was a dumb old map, and I was obsessed from the first 5 seconds I played it, and I couldn't stop playing it for years. And at some point it was just playing on the pub servers constantly and getting better and better, and then just my desire to be better and better at the game was always there. Because it was, like the early 2010s. This is still when clans were around. So I joined a clan because I used to play on a pub server all the time. And then from there, I started playing a competitive mode that was called Highlander, which was 9 versus 9 with one player on each team playing each class.
Mhm.
And so I started playing that with this clan that I was in. And from there, I started watching some of the 6 versus 6 games in ESEA, like the really early ESEA seasons, like 5 or so. Um, which were, at the time, the games were being cast through a Mumble server. Like all the people who wanted to watch would join a Mumble. The casters would be in a private channel. Everyone else would be muted, and then you would have to watch the game in Source TV and spectate yourself. Or you would like watch after the fact. There was a channel called XTV that would upload all the games that were being cast, and so it was. I mean, it was just so early esports, so low. I mean, there was no budget. It wasn't just low
Mhm.
budget, there was no budget. And um but watching those games and just wanting to constantly push myself to be better at the game. And I don't that wasn't even a conscious decision. I was
Mhm.
just so in love with it that all I wanted to do was play it. It was, it was a form of escapism for me. And I was clocking like 60 hours a week in the game. And I just, slowly I joined a 6v6 team and not even ESEA, like a different free league. And then, you move up to ESEA, which was the main league for TF2, and also had like CS, like it had
Mhm.
1.6 and Source at the time.
Mhm.
Um, and just slowly grinding and grinding. And I would play every day, constantly, just constantly practicing, until I was able to make it into invite and play professionally, which is such a. I mean, it's always so funny to say professionally with it because there's not really another
Yeah.
word that's good for it. But if we won a tournament, you got $1,000, and like you were just happy to pay for the cost because you had to pay for your own
Yeah.
flights to go to LAN. So if you just broke even, that felt like a massive win. But at the time, I mean, there was no money in gaming at all. Everyone that was there was just playing for the competitive spirit and the passion of it.
Mhm. And I guess uh out of curiosity, what was the highest amount that you earned, if you remember from a tournament? Like, what was the highest number in total?
In total, I
Uh,
forget
it,
the
in an event. That's what I'm trying to say.
yeah. It would have been the season that we won ESCA invite, and um, I can't remember the total, but I know that each of us individually got $1,063.
Hmm.
That was the most I ever won, and that was in 2015 or 16. Um, that was right around when I had stopped, and then I came back super briefly in 2017, 18. But my real competitive, like serious tenure of playing was 2015 and 2016.
Hmm. Hmm. And then it says so on your Liquipedia page for TF2 that you made soldier. And so, what about the position made you want to
I
play that role specifically, more than any other role within the game?
Yeah, I just realized I love movement in FPS games, and I love projectiles in FPS games. That's really it. Rocket jumping is such an. I mean, the Source engine is amazing. Rocket jumping and what you can do with movement in the Source engine is so fun and engaging, and it feels like the movement itself is something you can just endlessly improve on.
Mhm.
And I love projectiles and predicting movement as well. Those were the two main things. And just being able to fire rockets and hit air shots and specifically the thing that I tried to do was be the absolute best player at hitting direct rockets on the ground. I would play. There was a game mode in this 1v1 training mode called MGE, and there was a map where you could only hit rockets directly, and I would play that for 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day. I was just locked in. I wanted to be the best at that little aspect of it specifically,
Mhm.
but those are just my two favorite things in FPS games by far. Just movement and projectiles.
I mean, my favorite position was engineer, and I mean, for that is so much easier than other positions because, like, for me, in my eyes, the hardest position was scout, and like it for me, it's so hard to like try to move around and while also trying to make sure you get your opposing or adversary the right shot. You hit them with the right shotgun, hit them with the right bat, while you're trying to move as fast as you can. But as engineer, you don't get to do shit. You just basically bunker down, sit down, make a turret, make sure you get all your stuff around you, and then you just make sure nothing gets broken, void all the spies and all that stuff, and just like chill and just chillax. You just farm all the kills, and so that's like my favorite position for engineer. And
Yeah. Yeah, in 6v6 engineer was like you would never main engineer, but it was if you had to defend your last point, one of your scouts or your roaming soldier, which was my role, you would switch to like engineer or heavy to defend last. But most of the time it was two scouts, two soldiers, a demo man, and a medic. And scout was definitely super high skill ceiling, hard to play, super high skill ceiling, but the best if you had the best scouts, you were gonna win. Like the scouts
mm,
won games, um, without a doubt. And a lot of scout mains have gone on to be really successful in other games. I mean, Nookie, who excuse me, plays on Giants right now in
mm.
Valorant. He was a scout main in Europe. There's a bunch of other people that have gone on to like Overwatch, etc.
Yeah, and also some people, even your colleagues in Sideshow and Brandon, I believe other people that have also gotten their footing off in TF2, and it's an interesting thing to note. And um, for TF2, what do you feel like is your personal highlight from your days in that game? You know, what do you feel like is your favorite moment that you've experienced, whichever case it might be?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, I it's not really a moment, but I definitely, cherish the times that I got to spend with my teammates in that game. Um, and I so it's tough. I mean, that's not one moment. I mean, winning ESCA invite that was yeah, winning ESCA invite, beating Froyotech, who were like the unbeatable team, and I mean, that was just that was my like my childhood dream basically was to win ESEA. And even though we got a million second places to that team I just mentioned because they were just so good, like winning one season was just that was all I ever wanted to do. When I was grinding, when I was like in my when I was a teenager that whole time. So being able to do that, yeah, absolutely.
And there was a ranking made by this person. I'm not sure if I'm not gonna get their name right, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I think it's Banny or Bunny. Banny, I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
Banny. He's
Yeah,
he's like the goat of
yeah.
TF2.
And I believe he's still playing right now as of this current moment. I believe so. I think he's been going at it for more than a decade by now, which is a testament to just him continuing to grind out and to cultivate a scene as well at the same time being the best player as he is and also doing the other stuff. And so about Bandy, he made a list of like the top 50 players in TF2 history, and he made you number 34. And it's an interesting thing to note regarding your place from an outsider for about you and how you land within the entire TF2 hierarchy, if one might say that, if one would say that. And so, what do you think about your place in TF2? Like, do you see yourself as um, one of the legendary players of the game, or do you feel like you're a level below that?
Oh, I mean, I listen, when it's funny because like talking about TF2, the competitive fire comes immediately back to me. I'm like 34, that's bullshit. I know I'm higher than that. But also, even still though, that's considering the game has been out for 16 years almost. There's been a competitive scene for 16 years. Being in the top 40, I think that was like a a list of what's the word? I'm trying to think of it. It was like a conglomerate list from
Mhm,
several really excellent players, Banny and some other guys,
mhm,
and just being able, yeah, I mean, being there, that's still, I regard that extremely highly, and I think, um, I'm happy to have had a lot of impact in the scene. I think in other ways as well. I think it's not just what I did on the server in that game that has me kind of etched in the history books. I think it's also myself and some of the others, Banny included, who you mentioned, who are, I think, really trying to pioneer the game to be or rather pioneer the scene to be bigger than it was, and trying to really push the competitive aspect of the game because we all loved it so much. And I think that that kind of that my for a decent amount of time, my content creation in the game, and I was like a really early Twitch streamer in that game. And what I did with you know casting, it being involved in tournaments, running an org in the game. I think that it's not just what I did on the server, but I think that in totality, I feel like I contributed a lot to that scene, and that's, I think, why. Yeah, what that'll all be included in my you know on my page in the TF2 history books. Um, so
You made plenty of frag movies also for your YouTube channel of Mila when you were using that act when you were active on that channel. So, what about that? Like, what was that process like in you making those frag movies? Like, what was that experience like?
I mean, back then, I mean, frag movies are just, they're not, I mean, they're not really a thing anymore. Certainly not like they were back then. I mean, frag movies were so cool. That was like
Mm,
the pinnacle of cool as a gamer then, which is really funny. But I mean, that was kind of your status. I mean, no one was, again, like there was no money in it. There was none of that. It was just about competition and wanting to be the best. And I think that's also a part of trying to, again, like leave a legacy in that space. And it's funny, like I still get like, because I'm just signed in on that YouTube channel when I'm just
yeah.
watching other stuff on YouTube. And like I even saw it yesterday, it's like, oh, I got another, like there's notifications, and then I click on it, and it's someone just like someone who says something like, I just returning to this legendary video after 5 years, whatever. And it's just, it's that's also why those were done.
Mm,
Those videos, not just from me, but from everyone else, some of these iconic movies of the game, like Prem by Cube always comes to mind. I think that's like the most iconic quintessential TF2 video, but it's all of those videos that um leave the legacy in the scene. Those are what people really remember too. And I also just remember when I was really bad and trying to be amazing. I remember watching like the TLR and Dave AC Soldier Duo frag movie, and all those like these legendary, who, it's funny
mhm.
because still in my mind they're like these legendary players of like the late 2000s, early 2010s, and how amazing I thought those videos were, how much that inspired me. And then I know that I did the same thing for the next generation of competitive players that came up after my time. Like I've had a bunch of the players who became the next wave of like invite top soldiers who had said to me like, yeah, I watched your videos when I was terrible and I thought they were so cool and wanted to do that. And it's just it's really wholesome, and it's just kind of the cycle that has gone on in that game. And I'm glad that those exist and are out there and are, among a bunch of other, I think, not to come across as egotistical, but I think to come across like I think they're out there among a lot of the other iconic frag movies of the game, which have
Mm.
been the linchpin of kind of keeping history, really. Um, yeah, it's just, I mean, yeah, no one, people, the like the Valorant players of today. I mean, they might, there's like the crazy 30-second vertical TikTok edits and videos like that, but no one is sitting down anymore to watch like a 6-minute edited frag movie. It's just so iconic of that time and the era. And because the game has been out for so long, that culture has never changed. Like the frag movies
Yeah.
are still a big deal in the scene, which is cool. I mean, that's kind of what happens when it's been around for so long.
And with the extent of the history of TF2's esports scene, one might say that it rivals that of other recognizable FPS games. For example, obvious examples CS and CS 1.6 and all the other iterations that it has graced the series over time. And you compare that with TF2 and what it is, what it has been, what it was, and what it is right now. Do you feel like bad or sympathetic over the sort of size the scene is regarding TF2 compared to other games like CS:GO, like given how um the relative size that it has as of now?
That's a really good question. I can think back to, I mean, I remember going to ESEA lands where the TF2 invite finals would be held and the CSGO source invite finals would be held and the 1.6 invite finals would be held. And I remember around 2013, 14, something around then when we were going, um, they actually all had about the same viewership. And when CSGO started taking off, I remember going to those lands the last 2 times they had TF2 there as well, and the shift in the the attention on CS:GO was just insane at the time. Um, I mean, I remember watching Pasha Biceps when he was on Virtus Pro, and like, yeah, Virtus Pro were there, and I remember him walking into the hotel because he was in this hotel in Dallas,
Mhm.
and there was just a line out the door of kids wanting him to sign their mouse pads, and that just happened. It felt like overnight. Like we went to one LAN, the same old regular thing. Like we would see the CS guys just at like the open bar, like nothing and Shazam and like those dudes, and then suddenly the next LAN 4 months later, there was just a flood of fans there. And, and it was also funny because ESEA, I don't think we're expecting that either because there
Mhm.
was just, you were in this open room. So you would be playing and there'd just be 40 kids watching behind you while you were playing. Like it was such a terrible, just janky setup. But it was in the period where I was like, wait a second, this game is blowing up. And
Mhm.
also, but that I think was a crucial time in TF2 because when we all saw an FPS game blowing up and players getting signed and making a living, I think it it made a lot of people realize that, or at least have the thought that I might be able to do the same thing. I mean, if these guys are doing this, why can't we? And that inspired some people to want to switch over to other games. Like when Overwatch came out, I think there were other people like myself, Banny, Sideshow, plenty of other people that were working on Team Fortress TV, Kurt, to try and push TF2 more because we felt like the game was amazing. At the time, I think that was probably around the era of the best viewership it was getting too. I think around 2015 17 or so. 2015, 2016. It's hard, man. It's hard to remember. It's crazy
Mm,
how long ago this was now. But
yeah.
um, at the time, I remember being very passionate and frustrated because it felt like our game is awesome. They're also a Valve game. Why can't we get the support they are with the majors? Why can't we blow up like they are? You know, we have the item, like we have in-game skins, we have a great competitive scene, we have all this stuff going, but the game isn't being supported. So, you know, we're gonna fucking do it ourselves was the mentality. And at the end of the day, that's just, what was quickly learned was that you can't have a successful modern day esport that is not supported by the developers.
Mhm.
And so at the time it was very frustrating. And now when I look back on that and see that the scene is still going and feel, comfortable with what I did there and content with my contributions to the scene, I'm just happy it's still going. I don't, because it's just ended up being what it's always been, which is people playing for the sake of competition and because their friends are there. And that is a beautiful thing within itself. And I don't
Mhm.
think it ever needs to be more than that. And what's also amazing about it is that because it's been out for so long, I think there are a lot more people that actually know about it and are aware of the scene than you would expect. And it's not because it blew up at any given point. It's just because it's stood the test of time. I mean, the only game that's had a competitive scene longer is Counter Strike, right? And
Yeah.
even at that, Counter Strike had 1.6 Source Go, and now we're heading into Go 2. And TF2 has just been TF2 the whole time. There's been no update. There hasn't been like an update, a serious update in like God knows how many years now, like 6 years or something. So it's just amazing that it's still going. I'm happy that it's still going and that people are playing it really just for the same reason that I started playing it. I really think that's just a special thing unto itself. And there was a long time where it kind of felt like, man, why isn't everyone trying to get into other games? Why isn't everyone trying to get into Overwatch, do other things? But that's never what it was about, and it doesn't need to be about that. It doesn't need to be about getting signed. It doesn't need to be about trying to play games full time and all that. It can just be about the competition and the community. And I just think that that's a very cool thing, and I'm just happy it's still going.
Mm. And I want to cover your experience in starting up Ascent Esports, and it's an org that you founded alongside somebody else. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. Around the tail end of your time in TF2, and so at that point, you must have been still been pretty young at that age to start an org such as Ascent competing in TF2 and then also Quake as that other game. And so, how did that come about for you? And how did that Ascent story start?
So I wanted to stop. I was burned out from competing, and I mean, that'll happen after, 4 years of playing 4 or 5 years playing 60 hours every week. I just eventually got burned out, and I wanted to continue being involved in gaming, but I just didn't really know, uh I was trying to figure out how, and that was a little bit after Overwatch had came out as well, because I was playing competitive Overwatch early on, and I just didn't have the same passion that I did for TF2, and I kinda regret quitting actually because I felt confident that I was very good, and if I kept practicing, I could have made it, but I also realized at the same time that I'm not playing nearly as much as I played TF2 because I simply don't like the game as much. So I know that I'm going to get passed by other people that feel about Overwatch how I felt about TF2 and why I was able to make it to the top there. Because you need the passion, you need to genuinely love it. And I just didn't. And so after I had stepped away from Overwatch, I was working a, a really awful job that I despise. And what is, I look back on is one of the worst time. I mean, possibly, yeah, it's up there with the worst times in my life. It was just very. I was very miserable, and I wanted to do something outside of that. And so I started putting my effort into Ascent, which was our team name in Invite, and then I decided to make it an org. I wanted to support TF2. I wanted to support other grassroots games, and since Quake is kind of the father of TF2, it was kind of a natural next game to get into. And then I always wanted to get into Counter Strike because I thought there was just a lot of audience crossover with those three games. And I felt like at the time I really didn't. I hated all of the. Rather hated. That's too strong of a word, but I think that a lot at the time I felt like all of the other organizations, top to bottom, were doing a really poor job creating content and branding themselves visually. It was very boring at the time. The only org that really started to come up and do anything interesting around then was 100 Thieves. And then, you saw how quickly every other org tried to do 100 Thieves roleplay. I mean, they all rebranded themselves as minimalist streetwear, late 2010s looking shit. And it was just, uh, that was a little bit after that was after I had started doing it though. So it was my desire to keep in esports, and it was also I thought that there was a lane that I could take, starting in grassroots games, trying to build a better visual brand. I knew that I could do well with content, and I was super passionate about it, and I loved running Ascent, and I have great memories from that. Some of the things that we were we were able to accomplish there in regard to getting our just having these teams at events and being able to be with the teams and feeling the passion and desire for them to win. And um it just I was able to eventually get a CS:GO team that I'm still really proud of. And listen, I'll take any opportunity to brag about it because I was like scouting the team, and it has Nismo, who's sick in Valorant now on M80. Um, Physic, who's also competing in Valorant right now. Riku, who's competing in Valorant right now. Other players who had gone on to have good careers in CS:GO. Katie was on the team early, and I was proud of that team too. The scouting, and it just eventually reached a point though where I realized that I was hitting a financial brick wall because I was 21. I was working a shit job in an office doing marketing and sales for a medical devices company, not getting paid enough, spending all of my money on this org, but it wasn't enough to compete financially with other orgs. So all the other orgs around our level, we were killing in engagement, killing in numbers. There's no way they could have sold as much apparel as we were selling, and it just didn't matter because they got some guy with $1 million to invest in them. And genuinely, when at one point when our CS:GO team's contracts ran out, competing in the tier 2 CS:GO ESEA MDL, the matches would get about 1,500 viewers, the playoff ones more. All of the players had less than 1,000 followers on Twitter, and when their contracts ran out, they were getting offers from other organizations that were going to pay 20 times what I was paying them. 20.
Uh,
Genuinely lighting money on fire. The players were talented, they were upcomers, but hey guys, they have less than 1,000 followers,
mhm.
and you are unsuccessfully making content. But how am I supposed? I literally could not compete with that. It didn't
Yeah.
matter that the org was doing better than their org. I just didn't have $1 million to blow. And even if I did, it wouldn't have been smart to spend it there. So
Uh,
I just realized like I hit a brick wall.
just by asking, like, about about the amount of money that you spent on your org, can you give an estimate as to exactly how many, just so you could give the listeners an idea as to what you were working with?
I mean, it depends on different things. I mean, I put a lot of money. I mean, you can kind of take a guess yourself. I don't want to disclose too much, but flying 12 players, six of which were in Europe, six of which were in America, to an event in England, paying for all of the flights, paying for all of the lodging for a several day event, doing that. Um, you know, uh,
And
the
and that was all you, right? That was literally all
yes,
just
it was
you?
literally all me. I had gotten a sponsorship from a TF2 items website called Marketplace TF, which gave us a little bit. I mean, a very small percentage of that. And then also at QuakeCon, I had met Kovac, who made Kovac's FPS aim trainer. And so we were sponsored by them as well. And again, very, very low amount. And that was a very small piece of the pie that I was paying up out of pocket. Obviously, any help was great. And I was happy to have both those sponsorships. But yeah, I mean, I was funding it all, 90% myself. And, the CSGO salaries that were offered were many, 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 many thousands of dollars. So uh, yeah, for TF2 and Quake, like the games were so small that there was no salaries, but we would pay for event travel, that all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the sort of competition that you mentioned about how um uh, uh tier two, like say tier three, tier four orgs have compared to the tier ones that are getting invested and getting assisted by venture venture capital investments and the like. It sort of gives off a pretty an uphill battle and a very steep one at that for orgs such as the one that you had with Ascent, and it sort of does help me remind as to what the state is right now with esports and how uh, kind of had the same sort of issues with how venture capitalists and how investment and how a lot of money are invested to orgs, big orgs, and how there's been little engagement as in followers, content, the stuff that you did, that you mentioned, and how that has been an issue up until now. Because as of right now, for me, I feel like the scene is consolidating itself, or it's sort of morphing itself into the state in which it should be. In which we have orgs that are run by people that know what it's like, that know what esports is, know what it's about, and and try to drum up engagement and impressions while also fueling a roughly a relatively competitive team. And so about the esports progression of the general scene, how do you view of the scene when it comes to creating content, creating impressions, engagement, while also having a balance between that and purely competitive teams? How have you seen the progression of that aspect in particular?
Well, certainly at a point, every org realized that content was the way forward. I think it was around the same. I think 100 Thieves have had an unbelievable influence on the esports marketplace, from how they operated their content to how they built their brand aesthetically. There was a period of time, like I mentioned, where everyone was just trying to rip them off. And I think it was a really kind of pathetic time for orgs, honestly, because it didn't work for any of the other ones because it wasn't authentic. It worked for 100 Thieves because Nade Shot the guy was into streetwear and that aesthetic. It worked because it was authentically him and he was the face of the brand. All the other orgs, you can't just switch up and, you know, throw on throw on the outfit and wear the Jordans and pretend to be the same guy that he is. Like, you're not. So it's not going to work. Um, but the one main thing that carried over, I think, from that era was the refocusing on content, because at this, I mean, every org knows that content is the way forward. That's the only way um, to really build an audience that is going to be passionate about your teams. It can't just be about the competition anymore. It used to be, but that is just not the case anymore. That is not how you drive, the most engagement. I mean, Sentinels drive insane engagement, and it's not because they just have, you know, they it's not because they just have five really good players. I mean, it's because of the players that they have, and also, frankly, the personality that their old players gave the brand that they've carried over. Um, and that's what it's really about. And Sentinels, they have done. I'm very critical of a lot of things that they've done, but they have done a great job of having their own identity, and you can see the same thing happening with all the other orgs when 100 Thieves popped off. Everyone wants to be the shit talk banter org. It works for some of them, but mostly it just works for Sentinels. And most of the other ones, they just come across as extremely corny. And I think that what Sentinels have proved out and 100 Thieves previously is that the real key to fan engagement and longevity, which I think Sentinels will have, is having your own unique identity and just having a good, sometimes having an amazing team can be an identity, but hey, did that really work for Optic Gaming with their Valorant team? No. No one really gave a shit that they were Optic Gaming. They could have been signed by any team. People just liked Yay and FNS and more and them. Like no one cared about Optic Gaming
I mean,
because they had
they
no
did
identity.
they did make some good like review videos, like vlog videos, and I can give them that, right?
Yeah, they did make some of that video. Yeah, they did make some of the content, but overall, compared to some of the other orgs, that they weren't able to capitalize that other orgs have with Optic have that legacy thing going for them for sure, but um I think there are a lot of orgs that are struggling to find their identity right now, and I think that's always been the case actually, but it's just become a lot more of a visible relevant issue right now. um Sentinels have done a great job with that. 100 Thieves have always done a great job with that. NRG have always done a great job with that. Um, I'm sure there are others that I can't think of off the top of my head. I mean, it's funny to say phase because of how dire their situation is right now, but at least for a long time they did do that. But I think that identity that people want to latch onto is is crucial, and I think a lot of orgs have to figure out how they're going to do that. And a lot of the orgs are riding off legacy right now. Um, they're riding off of the we've been around for a decade. But where do you go from there when a decade later there's a whole new audience of young esports enthusiasts consuming all of this? Do these do these kids who are like 14, 15 that love Valorant, do they really care that much about uh, I'm just going to throw an org name out there. I don't know if it's necessarily true, but like Cloud9, who are kind of a legacy org in my mind. I mean, they definitely might care about Zelsis and Zeppa, and because they're streamers, but do they care about Cloud9? Do Cloud9 have a super strong identity right now that people latch onto? I
Yeah,
think
like
that they have a legacy identity and older esports fans, but for the newer young generation, they're latching onto Sentinels.
yeah,
They're latching onto the orgs with an identity.
yeah, because like we're at a point right now that I believe that esports is heading into its second decade. You know what? Not second decade. I feel like it's third decade because we're going back into the 90s, like late 90s when we're talking about North America specifically. And we're at a point right now in which, as you mentioned, we're having kids in which they don't know what the origins of those established orgs are like right now. Because as you mentioned, Cloud9. I mean, of course, I mean, I'm not. I don't want to assume, but a standard 14-year-old is not going to know who Jack is, right? The owner of C9 or what he did. Same thing for Optic and also EG also as well.
I was gonna say actually, I think Evil Gene. I didn't think of EG, but I think they're actually the perfect example. EG are literally legacy. I mean, they've been
Yeah,
around for. There was an EG TF2 team in 2007. Like that's how long they've been around. Long enough that it made sense to have a TF2 team. Okay,
yeah.
so that EG I think are the perfect example of a 14-year-old new esports fan. They don't know who they are. Why should they care about EG? That means
All,
nothing to them that they've been around for 20 years.
all they know about is a little bit of Dota, or if I mean that's another subject in itself because like EG is also an org that is well known for Dota, but I mean nowadays it's just the current Valorant roster because that's the one that's been making a lot of noise for its org. As you mentioned, it's just EG, and they've kind of had the issues of content at the start of this year, one might say, because it's sort of been memed about how they did not have as much impressions in the start, but then they've slowly kind of been able to get used to it and started getting the hang of what that's like. And so yeah, I do feel likewise as to you know uh, um your thoughts on AG and stuff like that. And I also talked to the social media manager for the um San Francisco Shock, I believe. I think she also works for NRG as well. And she sort of hits it home as to how it's imperative for one to have a social media presence in various platforms because you can't just not do the same. You can't just do the same thing for each particular platform. You got to do it in a way in which it engages with the audience effectively in, say, Twitter and YouTube and TikTok. Because, like she said, that for Twitter, um, it's sort of the mouthpiece of an org during the game. Like, for example, you have they're basically a commentator, a viewer, sort of in the same way as a standard fan that is watching the game. It's the same way as a social media manager, and and they just commentate and just tweet on the spot, and they might put in a graphic here or there, but the name of the game is engagement, and I feel like these orgs, including EG, NRG, as you mentioned, and also Sentinels, are getting starting to get well versed in that aspect. And for Sentinels, I might argue that they've been able to be at this sort of stage because of their competitive results. Because remember, I mean, sure, Sentinels was a very a good Valorant roster at the start of its stint in Valorant in the game, but it was only after they won Reykjavik in 2021 in which that popularity really got up to the state in which it is in right now. And so yeah.
Yeah, I remember going on kind of a long-winded, excuse me, kind of monologue about Sentinels on a Plat Chat episode. It was when they did that spin the wheel thing where they were kind of ripping on Shaz and their underperformance in the previous year.
I saw that by the way.
And
I saw that by the
okay, yeah, and I don't want to necessarily rehash the whole thing. I wish I could remember what episode that was on, but I think what is I think what is kind of at least rubbed me the wrong way with that and is they've done a great job capitalizing off of what they got, but that really rubbed me the wrong way because they owe so much to that original team. That org was again, I mean that org was in the position of having no brand. No one cared about Sentinels. They had like Booga, who won the World Cup, but hey, people like Booga. They don't care about Sentinels. They had XQC signed. They have, you could look now, they have YouTube videos on their channel of XQC's stuff from his stream that has 2,000 views. I mean, no one cared about Sentinels. That roster blew them up so hard. And they built that roster by saying, hey, Zoms, make us a roster. And it just so happened that he put together the world beating roster and a team that had a ton of personality. The Sentinels' entire brand, you could trace it back to the first time that Dapper teabagged someone in the Ignition series. Genuinely. Their whole brand is based on that. That moment is the catalyst to Sentinels being the most engaged with esports brand. And so when they were disrespecting that roster and specifically Shaz, who had IGL'd their team to the top. And in that previous year, they wanted them to play with Shroud. They never got them a coach. They never tried to do any serious help or step in from the org side. And then to, I guess at best poke fun at their previous roster's lack of results that they had no hand in changing after that roster blew their entire org up. I was like, all right, come on, guys. Like that team, you know, credit where credit's due to continuing the success, but you can't not acknowledge that you kind of hit the fucking lottery. But they've capitalized off of it. So
Mm.
there has to be credit due there too.
Yeah, and also we're at a point in which none of that same Reykjavik 2021 team, it's no longer with the team, no longer playing within the team. Save for Tens, of course,
Right.
but the brunt of that genesis and onus of the personality of that org lies to the other members, as you mentioned, Psalms, Dapper, Sick, and Shazam, and then uh, and yeah, it's kind of the state in which these orgs are with their content and stuff like that, and drive moving the focus away from that and sticking still within the content aspect of you and your career, Wyatt. I want to know. Talk to me about your experience in the Jerma Rumble. What was that like?
That is such a deep. You know what's funny about that is I think at the time that I was in that, I might have been like 17 or 16. So I mean, I, I could activate a long-winded ramble here about how, because early on in TF2, I was doing a lot of content. I met uh who was then Star, now Stir, who's also a TF2 content creator and then expanded and is more of a variety creator doing a bunch of different things now. But I'd met him super early on. Jerma was a TF2 YouTuber early on. So I knew those guys so long ago. And yeah, so Jerma put me in, I think it's the second Rumble. And yeah, I think I was like 16 or 17 at the time. And it's just so funny that on the Jerma wiki, it shows that my age is like in my 30s, which I'm still not. I mean, I'm 27. I still haven't made it there yet. But people, because I didn't show my face or anything, I had this deep ass voice since I was 12. So people just thought that I was a grown ass man, but I was actually just 17. And yeah, it's pretty funny. That's one of those like little tidbit facts that like once in a while someone in my chat will be like, why were you in the Jerma Rumble? And then it's like, I have to explain the whole thing. Well, actually, all right, I knew those guys from TF2 content creation. We used to like pub in TF2 together all the time. I'm in a bunch of their like, I'm just in a bunch of their random TF2 videos playing with them. Um, yeah, that is just some funny ancient history that gets brought up once in a while. I mean, he never even mentioned it to me. I don't think. I was just in it. Like, I don't think he told me that. I don't think he ever said like, "Hey, you're going to be in this." But I was just in it, and I was like, "Oh, sweet." So yeah, that's just a funny little tie-in. Again, just kind of like how many talented people have come out of TF2 despite the size of the scene is crazy.
Were you disappointed that you didn't win?
I mean, yeah, definitely. Looking back at it, definitely disappointed. It's also funny looking back now as someone who's obsessed with wrestling. At the time, it was just like funny for what it is, but now, yeah, like looking back at those is totally different enjoyment. And I am upset that I didn't win, of course, but at the end of the day, again, just like the little things I really appreciate. I guess being a part of history in different small ways, I guess, makes me feel content.
Some pretty good history at that as well. One might ask, uh, uh, how was that? How how did you come together with Jerma during those TF2 days? How did you meet him?
Yeah, so I remember I was um so there was a TF2 content creator named Icy Tooney. He was the first TF2 YouTuber that started getting some traction with gameplay commentary videos because that was, man, back then, gameplay commentary videos, those hit hard. And so I started doing the same thing. And then Star started making videos, and I saw his really early on. And I just immediately thought that his videos were amazing. I thought there was just something, he was just awesome. And so I had already kind of been going, and I was like the second biggest content creator on YouTube at the time, which I mean, that meant I was getting like 7,000 views on the video. But and then I started playing games with Star a lot, and then shortly after that, Jerma started making videos, and Star started talking to him, and then yeah, we would just start playing TF2 together, and from there, I just kind of just kept. I appeared in a number of both of their videos as kind of just a side character because I had that was also after a bit I stopped making content because I was just so into competing that that was my primary focus. And then I was like an extra in a lot of their videos basically. Like it would be them as like the main focus or whatever. So it was like either of their videos, and then I'd kind of just be like playing with them, little comments here and there. But yeah, it was, I was just hanging out with them as a friend most of the time, and remember those days very fondly. That was also, I guess, a part of like the. I was just so excited to get on and like hang out with those guys. Definitely a way of kind of goes back to the escapism thing, But yeah, remember those days fondly. It was fun.
Might have been an extra in those videos, but but you probably would have, but you probably was number one in your hardcore fans' hearts, and so that is a guarantee that I can say at the very least. Um, from then on in TF2, you dived into a little bit in Overwatch, and I want to know. Talk to me about your time in from your time in I'm Your Huckleberry in that team. What was that? What was that like?
So when Overwatch came out, that was the equivalent of the FPS. I mean, that was just the FPS gamer gold rush. All of the FPS players from any obscure other game, any FPS game outside of Counter Strike, and even some guys from Counter Strike. I remember playing against Steel. He used to play like, I mean, he was called McCree then, but he would
Mhm.
like play McCree on a team and like, yeah. So even some guys from CS, but everyone for the most part from TF2 was at least trying it. And I was playing on a team with the Fragile, who's one of my teammates in TF2. I was playing with Avast. Funny enough, I knew Avast from TF2, and we played together on that team. And then, obviously we know each other all these years later and doing Plat Chat. It's just funny how some of those things go. But um, yeah, I was for a bit. I was super into it, and I really liked the game, and I really liked competing. But I didn't keep that passion up for long. One of the things that really caused a slow dislike for the game was how fast some of the metas changed, and really early on, all of the DPS heroes became irrelevant. And I remember it was during, I think, the quad tank meta that I just couldn't take it anymore. It was just not a fun experience playing an FPS game where you have four tanks and there's no aiming. Like I'm playing Winston and just jumping around, not having to aim at four massive bodies. Like it was just not fun. And so it was around that time I wanted to stop, and then I was at the time I thought that I should just get a different job, and yeah. Another little period of fond memories, though. Like recently, I went back and watched some of the games from this E League qualifier that we were in. Avast and I watched them. It was just funny to go back when playing Farah. For some reason, DDK was casting our games. It was just, yeah, it was again just fond memories. Sometimes I wish I stuck with Overwatch longer, but at the end of the day, I'm content with the little like short tenure there. It was fun. The team was super fun. Everyone on that team was hilarious.
I feel like did you guys play against Cloud9 in one of those
Yeah,
events?
we got put 6 feet under by Cloud9. They just smoked us. Yeah, but we almost qualified for the E League tournament. We were like one game off qualifying, but yeah, Cloud9 definitely rolled us in that event. I think that was when Cloud9 were like the god team. I'm pretty sure, like
Yeah,
them and Envy.
and that was pre Overwatch League days. I think literally in the start of this game, as you mentioned before, and
Yeah.
and how long did that team last? Just to be exact, a few months.
Definitely longer than a few months. I think we started playing just as the beta was ending and the game was getting officially released, if I remember correctly. And then we must have competed for at least 6 months, I think. because I
Yeah,
think if I remember correctly, I think it lasted around because Overwatch came out in like the spring, and then we played through the summer, through the fall, into the winter, and then I think it was around then that I stopped. Hard to remember exactly, but it was probably half a year or so.
yeah, because like according to the team's like match record or history, it's only been one event, and that probably was that one qualifier that you mentioned earlier in that interview. So I just had the need to ask, just in case I kind of missed if there was something that I missed on that
Yeah,
aspect.
we played a lot more than just that tournament, but at the time they were all. I mean, it was funny because every team was playing in them outside of the top few signed teams, but they were just these obscure. I mean, seriously obscure tournaments. But everyone was playing in them because that's all there was. I mean, I remember we won one of these tournaments, and my prize money for getting first place was $23.16. Like that,
Whew.
those are the kind of tournaments we're talking about here. But it was funny because they had all of the like tier 2 and tier 1.5 teams, but that's all you could play. There wasn't the Overwatch League, there was no circuit. And that's why that one E-League tournament was a big deal. That was the first big tournament that there was. And all of the other ones were just, yeah, you're playing for, you can it'll pay for lunch if you win. So
That's esports, baby. That's just pure
yeah,
100% unadulterated balls to the wall esports. Can't beat it like that.
absolutely. We were trying to get signed so desperately too, and it just never happened, and it was so frustrating. I remember, I mean, because I mean, we were looking at other teams, and it's like, first of all, these guys suck, but they're making $1,000 per player monthly. Like, if we could make that, we would be balling. It was just like, dude, $1,000 a month, and we would be. I remember we tried to get signed by this team called Nerd Rage, but they were getting all of their funding through a CS:GO lounge sponsorship,
Oof.
and then while we were in talks, lounge shut down, or so they couldn't
I
sign us anymore.
I think that was during the
Uh,
time like about the whole CS:GO Lotto thing of T Martin. Was that around that time?
I think it was around then. Yeah, I want to say it had to have been. It was something like that, and then we were also talking to the mostly it's like a fighting game community org, Panda Global.
Ah, okay.
Um, and we were in talks with them, and they were going to sign us, but then they had gotten sponsored by Geico, and Geico didn't want to be involved in any games that had guns, even though it was. I mean, it was Overwatch, like they're shooting like what Soldier 76, just shooting lasers. So we didn't get sponsored by them either, and that was also part of the frustration too, was because at the time I was in my brief time in college before I got kicked out, and so I was studying. I needed a job at the time, and then all these other teams that were signed, they were scrimming like 6 to 8 hours a day, and we could scrim for 3 hours at night. So we felt like we needed to get signed, and we just kept getting rolled and never could. And so that was also extremely frustrating.
You mentioned a major point that a major part that I want to get into. You were kicked out of college. How did that happen?
Yeah, it's not for anything exciting. I just didn't show up, and then they just said, "Hey, why don't you just stop showing up permanently?" Like that. That's really all that happened. It was nothing. It was nothing crazy. I just despised school. I despised school my entire life, and I just felt like I had to go to college because that's what you have to do. I was majoring in psychology because I needed to major in something, and I just didn't show up. I mean, that's really all it was. I just didn't like going. I would leave my house to pretend that I was going, and then I would just do something else because I just despise school.
Maybe you might have went to the computer lab, downloaded Steam, or if it had that sort of like free software, you play the game over there. Maybe that's what you did.
I never thought about that. That would have been a good idea. It's funny too because I would actually go to the campus because there was a fire taco truck on the campus. So I would just go there to get food, and then I would leave and just go like I can't even remember where I would go. It was near downtown, so I think I would just like, go downtown and walk around, like go to a coffee shop, whatever, like be on my laptop or something. Yeah, it was dumb as hell. I would still go to the campus just to get tacos or a burrito.
That's a good deal, man. That's a fair trade by my standards. I probably would have done the same thing if I was in your shoes. That's for sure. Um, what's your favorite taco?
What's my favorite taco? Dude, that's a good. I just had one of those moments where someone asks you like who your favorite artist is, and then you just can't remember. You don't, and then it's like, have I even listened to music before? I, um, damn. I don't know. I'll get back to you on that. I mean,
All right.
I make breakfast tacos every day. But I don't think that would be my favorite. I don't. I Let me ponder. I'm gonna
All right.
ponder, and I'll get back to you on that one.
All right. All right. Well, I'll make sure to ask that again in the future. Well, from TF2 and Overwatch, you eventually then made the jump to Valorant, or there might have been a time in which you dabbled into another game. If you're able to talk about that also. But um, going into Valorant, um, what did you see in that game that made you want to pursue it in the same way that you pursued the other games that you worked on in the past?
So when I was I so I worked at this marketing and sales job at a medical devices company from when I was 20 to 24. And just after my 24th birthday, which is in December, I had the opportunity to move to Los Angeles to be in this gamer streamer house with Kurt, Jake from Overwatch, Custa from Overwatch, Bren, and Jaws from Overwatch. And I just quit my job and took that opportunity. I was so fucking miserable. I needed to get, I mean, I was, at the time, I was living at home and I was living in Buffalo, which is where I'm from. I didn't want to be there anymore. I was so miserable. I didn't really have a plan. I just quit my job and left. And then, which is such like an American trope to just quit your job and go to LA, but I did do that. And then I started editing videos for Sideshow and Jake, and I managed their YouTube channels for a long time that year. So that was how I was paying the overly expensive rent because I was in Los Angeles, and it was that year then that also COVID happened. So we were in lockdown that entire year, and we were just all stuck in this house together that was plagued by an ant infestation, but we couldn't get an exterminator over because of COVID. That we didn't have hot water for months and it couldn't get fixed because of COVID. Like it was just it was a mess, man. It was so bad. It's funny in retrospect, but at the time it was miserable. I mean, I was in a robe playing Fortnite every day, drinking rosé, just trying to make it through. Luckily, Bren had bought all this gym equipment before COVID kicked off, so we had a home gym. That was the respite from the otherwise depressed days. But um that was also the year though that I had carried over Ascent when I was moving there a little bit, but I quickly that was about the time when I hit that brick wall that I told you about with the 20x salaries. Didn't know where I could go from there. I knew that if I wanted to grow, I couldn't just be in TF2 and Quake, of course. But if I don't have $1 million investment, how am I supposed to do anything else? And so that's when I decided to end that project and focus on figuring out what I could do next. And shortly after that is when Valorant was coming out in beta. And all of these guys that I knew from tier two, excuse me, CS:GO were all switching over to Valorant. And so that immediately captured my interest because like I had seen my own players switching over. So I was like, oh, dude, how's like I want to watch Nismo play this game. At the time previous to then, I was wanting to sign Asuna for my CS:GO team. Um, and so like I wanted to watch him. I wanted to watch all these guys that I knew, players that I was players that I interested in signing, players that I had signed. And so that's how I was initially into it. And then um, all of the guys that were doing Plat Chat Overwatch at the time. decided to do Plat Chat Valorant, which was initially called Clutch or Kick, which was a trash name. And Kurt fought to get it changed to Plat Chat Valorant and won. Thank God.
Thank God,
So,
indeed.
I mean, that name was ass. So it got switched. And a few episodes in though, not everyone was that interested in Valorant because, Overwatch League was still going at the time. That was other people's main focus. Is Valorant even going to do well? Who really knows? Um, and so I just kind of jumped on the opportunity to be on that. I didn't know where that would take me or what that would entail, but I knew I needed to. I needed some kind of opportunity to do something. I hadn't really done content in a while, and at the time, I actually didn't really want to do my own content. I was enjoying not being in front of the camera. I mean, for as much as I do in front of the camera and how that's my livelihood, I love not being on camera. um, but I knew that that was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up, and so I just dedicated myself fully to the game. Um, and I loved. I loved the game. I dedicated myself fully to it, and it just carried on from there.
Were there any worries about you switching over to this new game, given that, there's underlying reasons behind your venture not going too well eventually? Were there any concerns about that, or were you just basically, I don't care where it goes and where it takes me, wherever I am, that's where I'm gonna be at. I don't care about what else, what was that like?
At the time, I mean, I just had nothing to lose. I mean, I was still able to. I was still at the time editing videos for Sideshow's YouTube channel. I was still running Sideshow's YouTube channel and running Jake's Overwatch channel. That was paying the bills, and I would get those videos done every day, and then I would just watch every Valorant tournament that was happening. I was watching every region, anything. I was up watching Australian games at night. I mean, I was watching every game I possibly could. Um, and yeah, I had nothing to lose, and I felt like if this does well, and if I kind of get my bearings again as a content creator and as a public speaker, I thought that I could maybe find a job at some point, kind of doing what I'm doing now, doing talent or whatever it may be. I just thought that you know, there might be something there and I have nothing to lose. So why not go all in? I'm stuck in a house all day anyway. I'm not doing anything. We're still in lockdown. There was nothing to do but commit myself to it.
And in that house, was it tier 7?
Yeah, that was the tier 7 house.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was actually what you were talking about, but I didn't want to ask right while you were just talking about,
Yeah.
your origin story in Valorant. And in Plat Chat, I mean, let's be honest, that was probably the first time I saw you and became aware of you and your presence in esports in general. Because me, like many others, first started to watch and take notice of Plat Chat through those couch streams. I mean, those
Yeah.
were the catalyst, one might say, for for the growth of the community, especially in the Reykjavik 2021. And my first impression on you when I was watching you commentate was like, God damn, this guy has a deep voice. Like, God damn. Is he really 18 or is he like 30? I'm not sure. Like, your appearance makes me a little confused. Like, because like you look so young, but your voice is so deep.
Yeah,
And
imagine. Again, just imagine how I felt when I was 12 with this voice. How people. I mean, it was just so silly, man.
but it hasn't changed. Is this always been like that since that
Yeah,
point?
yeah.
That's crazy.
I just hit puberty and had this deep voice at 12 years old, which was
That's
at the time it was so goofy to have this voice. But I would get all the time like, "You're gonna have a career in radio, kid." I mean, it was young enough that people were still saying I'd be in radio, but
honestly,
yeah.
yeah. Why didn't you go into like radio or something like that earlier?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I mean, the first, I did start making content when I was 13. So kind of did in a way. It was just, I was always obsessed with gaming. So it just, that was always the prize that I kind of had my eyes on, was being in, doing that, but for video games.
Mhm. And it's still incredible seeing you and planting your own jokes and building your own personality and gaining a presence within Valorant and also the entire esports because one might say that could like be that's like your day one, being with Plat Chat, so long as Valorant is concerned. And about Plat Chat, you've had a very interesting and also a very fun dynamic with the talented people that are within that org or show. Of course, obvious people, Sideshow, Bren, Bala, and then Mimi, and then other people, other guests that come in from time to time, and all of which maintains that sort of appealing and funny and interesting dynamic that this particular show has. And so talking about specifically about that dynamic with the core members of Sideshow, Brennan Bala, and then anyone else that I might not have mentioned beforehand. How has that chemistry developed from the early stages up until now?
Well, I appreciate the kind words. The thing that sets us apart is irreplaceable and it can't be copied. And it's the fact that I have known Sideshow since 2015. I've known Kurt since 2014. And I've known Bren since 2016. I knew Avast since 2015. I mean, that's just, you can't replace. I mean, we're real friends. Like that just can't be replicated. And so that is the crux of it being what it is. Without that, I don't think it ever would have grown to be where it's at today. To have the importance that it has in the scene today would have never happened. And then just over time, as certain people, there was a period of time early on where Bren was he was on the show and then he took a break for a long time because he wanted to I think he wanted to focus on himself personally, and at the same time, he was still working for the Overwatch League, and so he set Valorant aside to do that. And that's when we brought in Bala, and it was one of those things where we all felt that he was talented, and um, it didn't take him long to get acclimated to just the like the vibe or the aura around the show that our friendship creates. And over time, and Ball has been an amazing friend to all of us, and so important to the show as well, both on camera and on the back end too. He's always been committed and vocal and interested and helping in so many different ways with the show. I mean, like even recently we started doing shorts and posting on TikTok. He just went out of his way and hired someone to do that. Like just stuff like that, and it was the same thing with Mimi. I can't even remember how I started talking to Mimi, but I know that at some point I started talking to her, became really good friends, and then everyone, we were all aware of her being talented. And um, at the time when I was interviewing slash working whatever with 100 Thieves, um, and I was gone, it was needed to bring in someone new, and so that's when Mimi kind of officially joined the team. And again, I mean, Mimi's personality, who she is um, just meshes with us perfectly. I think we just we got lucky that two people were around in the scene that understood what we were about so naturally and fit in with us so naturally. And so that's how their involvement has kind of come in. But again, yeah, the bedrock of the whole thing is, I mean, it just it sounds like it's friendship, but it really is. I mean, that's really that is it. That is why the show is what it is, and that just can't you just can't replicate that. It's just a real connection we all have to each other.
And of course, that has led to you guys garnering plenty of fans in within this game's community, and myself included. I make sure that I watch a few episodes, a few minutes of the podcast from time to time, while I'm covering other games and the like, and it has a particular place within this community also as a result of that. Uh, what do you think of the reaction, like the people's reaction, as in what they think of your content of the show and the personalities that it has? What do you think of the people's perspective upon watching your show?
I think that people are able to consciously or subconsciously recognize that natural connection that we have to each other and the real friendship that we have with each other, and that is attractive unto itself. I think also it was so obvious and is so obvious the the passion for the game that it was there, and you could always see it in the couch streams. I mean, we would be going nuts for, I remember like when 100 Thieves came back and beat Ascend and
Mm.
Nitro started popping off, the games with Crazy Raccoon, like all of those moments of just genuine enthusiasm and love for the competition. And I think those are I think those are the two main things. I mean, it's funny, but I don't for the most part, I think there's a lot of people that appreciate that we cover stuff, and it's probably how they get their news in the scene and are aware of what's going on, how they catch up on certain games and everything that's occurring. But I really don't believe that there's a lot of people who actually listen for the opinions and the analysis. I think that's genuinely pretty secondary to everything else. I know there is a I feel like there is a very vocal minority of people that hyperfixate on our opinions and our analysis, but the silent majority are there for the vibes, I guess, is how I would put it.
I think the biggest examples that you talked about are the screenshots of like the Plat Chat Guarantees, and people doing that just to sort of highlight any mistakes that you guys have had in international events, or maybe the positives. Because I saw a tweet from you about, I think it was about lock-in and you predicting the finalists, or it might be America.
It was Locken. Bren posted
Ah,
that.
yeah, there it is.
I try to avoid. I don't really post that. I don't know. I don't like to post that kind of stuff about myself. Like I was right. I don't like posting that kind of stuff ever. But Bren posted that. But yeah, sometimes we'll get the occasional like people are like, holy shit, they got that right. But for the most part, what I learned very early on is that no one gives a shit. Like,
Yeah,
no one cares when you're right. And when you're wrong, it's funny. So just relish in the fact that people are laughing and it's fun and it's funny to be wrong because it doesn't really matter. Like those and that's another aspect I think that's crucial to us and the charm of it is that we'll all say exactly what we think and no one cares really if we're wrong or if we're being dumb and if we're being we all of us like getting made fun of. We all make fun of each other. Like messing up horrendously is funny. So like just live in that and enjoy the fact that it's funny and fun and people are laughing with and at you. And and we all enjoy that, you know? Like that is why we like the Plat Chat guarantee. We like we lean into that because it's funny
yeah.
when we all get something wrong. That's just funny.
Yeah, for real. Like that was definitely like those kinds of segments, and also others that are such that really had me dying laughing and had me enjoying the podcast even more. Not just as a journalist, not just as a writer, someone who just covers the game in an objective fashion and a storyline fashion, because I like doing interviews of that aspect as well, but also on the casual side, and that has really helped propel. the game forward much farther than, let's say, if these people, yourself and Sideshow and then everyone else, does it individually. And yeah, it does really drive home the impact that Plat Chat has on the community. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely agree, and it's always existed in this, um, at least for us and how we've tried to manage the show and approach it. It's just always been so tough because, despite the show's success, um, monetizing it has always been extremely difficult. No one involved can make even close to a part-time job's salary off the show. And so it's always been this balancing act of trying to manage that, and we all know how important it is for all of us as a group and what it's done for us all individually. But that's always been an issue that's kind of, been an albatross around the neck of the project. And it's something that, we're always trying to some extent, do what you can to change that around. But it's um, yeah, it's been an amazing thing that has really propelled all of us individually, even though, it's the case has been that it's, the whole has been, uh, better than the sum of its parts in that way.
I mean, even now, Plat Chat has more subscribers than the original channel, the original Plat Chat, because I think it beats it by like 5,000 subscribers as of the time of this recording. I think so. I think maybe it's at around 50,000, maybe.
Yeah, I know that the Plat Chat Valorant channel has gotten a lot more subscribers this year since, America's, not just America's, but since the franchise league began, period. And since we had started uploading all of the shorts and TikToks as well, because those have gotten a lot of traction. So it's been a little combination of both of those things. And frankly, I mean, also, the Overwatch show is great. It is the foundation of Plat Chat, period, and it's still great. And the people on there are super talented. But it's not in their hands that Blizzard suck and they're managing the Overwatch League horribly. They can't do anything about that. Like they're going to lose viewership, and it's totally out of their hands. And on the flip side, to some extent, I know that we've also gained viewership just because Valorant is doing extremely well as an
Mhm.
esport. That's not even necessarily what we're doing. It's just we happen to be at, some element of that will always be being in the right place at the right time, and that's what the show is as well. It was, in the right place at the right time. We've been consistent. We have the right cast. And now when Riot's killing it with Valorant, we are inadvertently just seeing the benefit of that ourselves.
Right. And with the growth of Plat Chat and the program and its popularity, it has allowed the people within the show to gain opportunities and gaining jobs with Riot and covering events. We already talked about this earlier on in the conversation. It was a long process for you specifically, but you've been fortunate enough to reach in to stand in the same shoes as your colleagues, and it sort of, but still, it sort of has me wanting, and also the fans as well, to bring back some stuff of Plat Chat, ergo the couch streams. Do you see that ever coming back?
I mean, it's not, can never say never. I'm sure there may be a way to do that. Um, but it's not something that no one has discussed it recently. I can tell you that. I can't remember the last time we talked about it. Actually, I can. It was after Copenhagen
Mhm.
because Kurt and I had traveled there just to do the co-stream. Everyone else was on the main broadcast, and so the days that they were off, whoever was off would come to this Airbnb house we had in Copenhagen and do the couch stream with us. The next event, though, at Istanbul, Kurt had gotten hired to do the production, and so at that point, it was just there's just no way. Um, it would have been. I mean, I would have been on every day and producing, and it's just like this is not tenable. So at that point, I think that was the last time we had a serious conversation about it. It's actually, I think maybe one other time too, it got floated. We were like, maybe we'd be able to do it for a side event sometime that we're not working. You know, if there's like another Red Bull home ground, for instance, or if only like Mimi will typically, or she worked at the Game Changers Champion event last year. So maybe if no one else is working that, maybe that's something. So it's not impossible, but for main circuit events, it is likely very, 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 very slim chance that that'll be doable anytime in the near future.
Yeah, and I understand that. It's such as the way of working in this game, and it's understandable if it's not able for these kinds of things to continue. It is what it is, and so uh, uh, moving on from that, um, what do you feel like is your favorite moment from working in Plat Chat?
Um, favorite moment. Um, I mean that one moment from the couch stream, the first one that I said when 100 Thieves were making the comeback against Ascend on Breeze, and Nitro just started going crazy at the end of that game. And Josh, the whole time, was the biggest Ascend fan on the couch and was just ruthlessly trash talking 100 Thieves the whole time. And then and then 100 Thieves came back, won, and myself, Avast, and Bren were just rooting for 100 Thieves the whole time. And just, there's nothing sweeter than Josh just in misery. Like, just it was just so funny because he was always supporting the European teams to the max, just to be an antagonist. Like he would even he was rooting for Gambit, who were the best team at the time, against Crazy Raccoon, who were like, you're rooting for the 99% odd favorite. Like, dude, have a little fun. So just that moment was so funny and so fun. That has to be up there. One of my favorite segments that we've ever done on the show, we were doing an agent tier list, and myself, Bala, Avast, and Kurt, we planned the segment to be that we were all going to troll Josh and like basically just fight for agents to be in tiers that they had no reason to be in, with all of our passion and just agreeing with each other like, yeah, that totally, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And he was furious, and that was a very funny segment. um those are definitely the first two that come to mind. I mean, there's so many other little ones, but I think that Nitro 100 Thieves comeback, that is probably my favorite moment.
And as someone who has been covering various games throughout your career in esports, I want to ask, um, given that you've been able to learn the ins and outs of these games, however long it lasted, Overwatch, TF2, Quake, and then also, as someone who has um, uh, managed an org in the time that it lasted, what do you think has been the biggest difference between covering Valorant and all the other games that you've done in the past? What has been the biggest difference for you in that aspect?
I mean, certainly the attention that I've gotten in Valorant. I mean, um, I feel like there's no way to say this without coming across as egotistical, but I can promise you it doesn't come from that. It comes from a deep gratitude and appreciation. I mean, listen, there was no way I would ever get recognized in real life because of what I did in TF2. But I think I've gotten recognized in Austin maybe like 10 times now or so, which is just every time that happens, it's crazy to me. It's humbling, and I'm very appreciative. And also, in a way, it just kind of feels funny. Like after it happens, I just kind of laugh to myself, like, "There's no way I'm getting recognized for being a Z tier celebrity on this Valorant podcast," but it happens a lot. And that is just such a major difference. And also, I think it's because of the audience that we've cultivated and that I cultivated with my stream and with the people that are interested in um, unnamed. It it's really odd because it's Valorant certainly does not go without its toxicity and cultural issues. Yet compared to when I was competing in TF2 and when I was a content creator in TF2, I receive a hundredth of the harassment that I did back then, despite having such a significantly larger platform, which is simultaneously perplexing, but I do understand it. It feels like that shouldn't be the case, but I do understand how it's the case, if that makes sense, which again, I think is just because of the audience that we've kind of cultivated specifically. Um, but it is interesting. I think those are probably the two biggest differences.
And covering going back into your view, not really that, but coming into your thoughts on pro Valorant and how you've been able to do so well in as many years that you've been covering this game. Um, what lessons have you learned from your past experiences in covering the other games that you've now put into use for Valorant that then enable you to be this this popular person and this well-known person as a result?
That is a loaded question. There's a lot of things. Frankly, I think in Valorant, I'm gonna pause for a second to think, so I can give a good answer.
All right.
Um, because there are a lot of aspects to that for sure. Um, I think right now and who I've been in Valorant, my life in general, and also how it ties into what I've done previously, I am the most myself that I've ever been, if that makes sense. So I know that's part of it because I have an identity which is my identity, which people can become attached to, and I don't think that was as much of the case before. Um, I know that is a very important thing, and that is a part of how I speak, my opinions, my I think assuredness in myself and my willingness to say exactly how I feel, but I try to do that in a way that is not disrespectful because that's never how I want to come across. I think it's you know, I definitely feel like that is perhaps the main thing, but also um I do I think I do things and operate exactly how I want to. I feel it's very authentic, and I do think that people, again, maybe consciously or subconsciously, are attracted to that. And I think that even extends to how I kind of mentioned right at the beginning of this, how I think I kind of, despite being in this content creator, influencer, whatever you want to call it, space, I do recognize that I am very, I don't behave in the same way that a lot of other people do, and that's not and I'm not saying that like that's a good or a bad thing. That is just the truth. Conventional wisdom and how people act in this space is very much to be present, to do a lot, to create a lot of content. And that is what works for the majority of people, to be out there all the time. But that is genuinely not who I am. And that's genuinely not what I want. I value my privacy a lot. I value my alone time a lot. And I like not being on camera. I like to show up and do my best and not overstay my welcome. I don't do this for the attention of it. I don't like receiving attention. I like what I do to I like the art that I create to receive attention. And I think that is one of the main differences between myself now and how I used to think in the past and how I used to create content in the past and how I wanted to be this big streamer and, kind of getting there to some extent with my co-streaming and realizing that that's not actually who I am. I'm not the guy who's going to show up and stream every day for 8 hours a day trying to get everyone to pay attention to me. And I thought that that's what I wanted to be, and it's just not. And I think I'm just behaving in the way that feels the most comfortable to me. And I think that there are people who appreciate that and latch on to that. That I show up, I do my best, I show up, I do, the couple episodes of Unnamed that I do that I love and put so much effort and care into. And I just like to put that out there and kind of go back to being in my own little space and not overstaying my welcome, not making myself uncomfortable, or rather, not making myself uncomfortable. There's nothing wrong with being uncomfortable at times, but rather not being authentic, trying to put on this facade of being the content creator that a lot of other people are and being what works for them rather than being what works for me, which is something that it took me a long time to realize. And it's something that, as well, it took me a long time to realize too, because I had a lot of goals when I was younger that I wanted to meet with content creation and with streaming. And I felt like to get there, you had to do things in a certain way.
Mhm.
And over time, I realized that that was just not, um, it was just not necessarily the case. And it's not necessarily that I wanted. And so in the past couple of years, I've reframed, especially in the past year, I've reframed a lot of what I actually want and what how I'm just going to be myself in the most authentic way possible. And I think a lot of that kind of comes out in how I think about um unnamed, because it's funny that, I mean, I've only done 2 of them, yet I think about it constantly. Because after doing the first one, it just clicked for me that I have never felt so passionate about something that I've done since I was competing in TF2 and playing 60 hours a week. Um, and I always had this idea in mind for it, that it would be something that I would do on my own time. I wouldn't force myself to do them. I would only do them when I knew that I wanted to and when I knew that it could be the best it could possibly be. And then I'll put it out. And I want that art to get the attention, and I want people to appreciate that, um, and realizing that, you know it's not, I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the creation, and that was something that I was not realizing for a long time and not acting on. I felt like I should be doing things that bring me attention because that's how I will succeed in this space, but that's not how I will. That's how other people will, and that's good for them, but that's not good for me, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was fairly long-winded, but hopefully I didn't run in circles too much there, and that
No, you
makes
didn't.
sense.
No, you didn't run around in any circles, and I really actually understand what you're trying to convey. And actually, it's kind of how I go about my business when I do my interviews. I mean, I don't want to just cover the game aspect of a particular person and player. I want to cover the story behind that player and cover exactly what it is that made them be the person that they want to be, such as why I wanted to talk to you in the first place. Have an interesting story, someone who has a deep history in a particular game that they were once very well attached to. I mean, you're still attached to it now, but not as much as before compared to given that you're covering Valorant now. And that's sort of arts that you mentioned that I kind of want to do also. And each person goes about it in their own particular way, but as long as it gives them a sense of satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment, say in the sense that they can do whatever they want to do, and that's just sufficient. That's just absolutely sufficient. And for that, um, uh, uh, I feel likewise, with your answer, and stuff like that. And so, um, you mentioned in your answer about how you are now able to be the person that you are right now. Uh, that said, why do you think you were not able to be the kind of person that you want to be right now back then?
For a long time, um, for a long time, when I was growing up, it was definitely a kind of defense mechanism to be very. I mean, I was very, extremely quiet, extremely introverted. I was the quiet person um, when I was growing up. That's what people thought of me, and to some extent, I think that's the reason why I do what I do. Just because I'm trying to, I guess, like prove to the world opposite. So it was partly partly that, using that as a defense mechanism, also trying to, I mean, I love clothes. It's truly one of my greatest passions, yet I would purposefully appear very bland despite loving to look at clothes and think about outfits and think about how I could appear. I never would act on any of it because I just wanted to um, very much so blend in and fit in and not receive a lot of attention. It was a way for me to feel kind of safe. And so that's something I did a long time for a while. That was essentially how I acted when I was um, around the time when I was playing TF2, when I was a teenager into my late teens, and then I kind of got out of my shell a little bit um, in my late teens, when I had like a little bit of like a scene kid era, which is funny to think back on. But I do think back on it fondly because I was at least getting out. I was getting out of that feeling that I had before. And then when I started working that corporate job and I had moved back to my hometown, I just reverted immediately back into that previous thought pattern where I was again very introverted. I was again appearing very bland. I was working a job that I hated. I was very miserable, and it was just a way for me to, um, yeah, not to feel comfortable and safe and not stand out. And um, yeah, I mean yeah, I mean, I was the only real positive thing, I guess, if you could think about it, positive that I remember from that time when I was working that job from 20 to 24 was I had so much time sitting in my little office space to just listen to podcasts all day that it just it really made me think that that was something that I could do, um, and it was something that I always wanted to do from that point on, and um, I think that's one of the main reasons why I kind of ended up where I've ended up, at least right now. Um, I think those two things have really guided my life. That frustration with being this known as the quiet person, and also that period of time where all I did all day was listen to podcasts 24/7, and I felt like I could do that. Those two things have been extremely significant, but yeah.
Which would you say was your favorite podcast that gave you the biggest inspiration that enabled you to want to do videos such as Unnamed?
Yeah. Oh, well, unnamed, I can tell you, I mean, when I was so I'm a super hip hop head nerd, and when I was growing up, I would listen to The Breakfast Club all the time in the early 2010s. Like, that show was red hot at the time. I loved listening to Charlemagne the God and his interviews, and that was definitely one of the seeds that was kind of planted early was just I would listen to every interview they did every single day for years and years and years. And then I know that's kind of the foundation of my desire to do interviews. And then podcasting in sort of more of the Plat Chat sense. My favorite podcast when I was, um, it's also a hip hop podcast. It was the Joe Budden podcast, which I think in a lot of ways has a similar vibe to Plat Chat. It was very based on the chemistry of the friends that were um, doing it, and that's what made it so good. And I actually even still I go back and listen to the old episodes from that time because it doesn't exist in the same way it did then. It's like totally different hosts. And I will still go back and listen to old episodes from then for inspiration because I think it is out of all the shows that I've listened to, it is the one with the best chemistry between the co-hosts. And I try and just kind of take away as much information as I can from that. But yeah, those are definitely two of the main sources of inspiration for me.
Yeah, and also there's a sense of authenticness when it comes to listening to those kind of podcasts because it's basically a conversation of people being real with each other and just you know just talking. It's just them talking. Just talking, having a good time, talking about what the thing that they want to promote, but also talking about other stuff. Things that 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 appeal to them at a particular moment. And I feel like those podcasts are stuff that I like to listen to. I don't really listen to any podcast, to be honest, which is surprising for to hear from someone like me, because like I prefer just watching documentaries and videos, short videos and short interviews of introspective interviews about a particular person. I mean, of course, I'll just give it right now. Nardwar, that person.
Oh yeah, I mean yeah, Nardwar is great.
Nardwar is like my one of my favorite people that I like to listen to, just mostly because of the reactions and the how celebrities react whenever they hear an interesting fact about them or a secret fact about them, kind of like what I just did to you like some time ago. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff I like to listen to, just those kinds of videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love interviewers that are able to I'm very inspired by interviewers that are able to disarm their guests in different ways and get them to open up, whether that be in that way, which yeah, you definitely did with some of the questions. Um, which it's funny as someone who cares a lot about interviewing, being interviewed, that I appreciate a lot of the questions you've asked and the line of questioning. Um, but also, yeah, to go back to the original point, yeah, I find those interviewers who are able to disarm their guests in different ways to be extremely captivating. Like how Nardwar does that. I always appreciated how Charlemagne the God would be extremely straight up in his line of questioning. And that is almost what people came to expect. Like they knew they were going to get the most honest, tough question. And that would kind of make people actually open up in a different way, even though that sounds like it would be combative. They were actually just kind of expecting to get asked that, and they would open up about the tough questions. And then also he would simultaneously ask really thought-provoking personal questions, which also made them willing to open up to those very straightforward, brutally honest questions. um, yeah, I find that to be the most captivating part of interviewing, and that's why personally I love getting people to open up about their humanity. I think it's the most relatable, beautiful thing about all people. And, the gaming and the esports and talking to people about that is kind of like a narrative vehicle into asking some of the things that I really want to know about them, which is about them as people, and I'm trying to figure out how I can do that to the best of my ability too. But that is what I love about this art form.
Yeah, and there's also many things that in which there's a line, as you mentioned, that there's a line that people don't want to cross when it comes to doing interviews, and I feel like that's particularly difficult in esports because, I mean, I feel like that's something that have there's been some conversations in which I have topics that I do want to talk about, but I understand also that it's kind of sensitive, a sensitive topic one as that, and that you're not able to ask that sort of question, so you kind of work around it in a way that it doesn't really impede onto that particular subject at that moment, and just make sure you don't really overstep your boundaries and stuff like that. It's sort of an interesting and difficult obstacle for me to go through when it comes to esports, particularly. Um, do you feel the same way whenever you do your interviews?
I I didn't feel the same. Well, it depends because I haven't felt that in the 2 episodes of Unnamed that I've done so far, but I'm pretty. I think I feel like I'm pretty particular about the people that I want to talk to. Um, Doing that we did for a while on the Plat Chat channel, like the secondary show called Back Chat, which was sort of like a group interview discussion thing, kind of a conversational podcast, but not really, where we would have a guest and then it was maybe like two of us from the show would be talking to them. And I found those to be much harder. Also, I think I think speaking I mean, there's such a massive difference with speaking face to face versus online as well. I don't really feel that with what we're doing right now, but I think it's because we both come from the interviewer standpoint and are kind of understanding what I think. I think like either way, I think we both understand what the goal is of doing something like this, what we're trying to do here. So it's a little bit different, but I think for um, people who are for people that are purely people that are excuse me for people that are purely guests that you're talking to. I think there's a big difference there, and the being able to look at someone and speak to them one on one had made a massive difference in the two unnamed episodes that I've done, because getting anything past talking about Valorant was essentially impossible in the context of when we were doing back chat. Um, and personally, when I'm doing an interview, I'm not. I want to talk also. I'm very cognizant about wanting to talk about evergreen topics because I want people to be able to go back and listen a year from then, um, and to have a lot of the discussion be relevant to any time period. And I think that's also something that doesn't become a focus of a lot of esports interview content. I think a lot of it is very in the moment, and a lot of it is driven by trying to ask questions that would get traction in the moment. You know, upcoming tournament, you just beat this team. Is this player really this good? Like stuff like that. You know what I mean? Which um, have their own place. You do that kind of media should exist, but that's not the media that I personally am interested in, which is why I don't do that. So,
Yeah, and it's sort of the thing that I go through as well, personally speaking, it's just sort of the line of work that I do. Sometimes, whenever I'm covering Americas and EMEA, I would like to cover other topics besides, the in the now moment. For example, they finish a game and I talk to them about that. I would like to cover about other topics besides that sort of relates to the context of, let's say, Americas and EMEA, but there's only little time that I have, because, like, for example, for us, we have like 10 minutes to do our interviews, and so kind of have to be quick with our questions and make sure that they're answered in a way that can um sufficiently answers our questions of what we want to talk about, and also um does it in a way that gains traction, because of course writing business, writing journalism, stuff like that, it sort of goes with that. And yeah, there is a sense of frustration from my end when I do interviews like that, because I want to do this. This is the
yeah.
what I want to do. and hopefully I'll be able to do that once the off season hits, and I'll have more time to do that. But it's sort of the obstacles that writers for such as myself that we have to go through. That's we have little time. We only have so little time to work with, and yeah, that's basically the main issue with that.
Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. I mean, I face similar but somewhat dissimilar obstacles, which I totally understand because I'm trying to do all of these episodes in person only, and talking to people that I don't really know and trying to get them to come sit down with me for a couple hours at a studio somewhere in person to interview them. And that's that is a big ask because I have, that is part of the reason as well why it's tough for me to do them super frequently right now. I live in Austin, Texas, and need to travel to do them, which is not easy. But it is a big ask, and I understand that. But it's something that I hopefully will be able to do more frequently. I'm never gonna be doing at least personally. I don't see myself ever doing like weekly episode Friday same time kind of thing. But I certainly want to do them more frequently than I'm doing now. And I mean, I do have a goal eventually as well. I would love to be able to do that as my main focus and try and just be fully independent because I truly love it so much. Like I said, I've done two of them. I think about it every single day. I think about it constantly. So that is the place I'd like to get to eventually.
Oh, for real, no doubt. Because like once you start doing these interviews, you're gonna want to do more. And I felt the same way when I started doing this around 2 years ago. I started doing this around Masters Reykjavik, and I think the only person that I talked to there was Sasi, and that was when he was with Vikings,
Right.
and I was only able to do one interview with that, but I really liked it. Although it was very nerve-wracking for me at the start to do these kinds of interviews, because I've only done like, let's say, two or three beforehand, because like I talked to one from Dota and then another one from League of Legends, and then this is my actual very first foray into to Valorant. But still, it gave me the drive to want to talk to more people and not just talk about what happened in an event and what happened in the series. Just basically real life stuff and doing stuff like that. And that's what I hope to do as well. And I hope it's something that you'll also get to continue to do because I really like those unnamed videos with Stellar and Psycho. I really like the how you did your conversations in those interviews, and I also gained a lot of attention also as well. A lot of hits as well. People really appreciate those interviews. It's really good.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. I mean, that's also why I appreciate this very much because um, I feel like you approach this in a similar way. I could definitely tell just by your line of questioning, even before this discussion of the last 10 minutes or so, that you have a very similar mentality just based on what you were asking me. Um, but yeah, it is. Yeah, I appreciate the the thought and time that you put into to the questions you're asking and how you've framed all this and the disarming Nardwar questions, Nardwar-esque questions that are very very funny because that yeah, like the Jerma Rumble is very funny. That is like those little things are um that those come up also just shows the the extra effort, which is very appreciated, and people notice that stuff. People definitely notice that when they see the effort. That's again, I always question how much of this stuff or how much of audience response sometimes is conscious versus subconscious, and I think again it's kind of both. But I think subconsciously people just realize when there's effort being put in, and they're drawn to it, sometimes thinking about that actively and sometimes not because it just comes across in the right way.
Yeah, and also it's sort of a way for you to learn also, because like if you want to do more interviews, you gotta have to to dive deeper into research and talking about a specific person that you want to cover, because like sometimes just talking about the game and their life may not be enough. Sometimes some stuff like that happens, and you know, it sort of forces you to go even deeper than the depths that you're familiar with. And so yeah, it's sort of like a learning lesson also in a way for you as well, just for future reference.
Yeah, definitely. It's been very enjoyable being on the other side of this. I said it to you just before we went live, but yeah, I have not been I don't th- I think the last I think the last interview I might have done was for a very obscure um online magazine for esports that interviewed, I think, of me and Sideshow actually a long time ago. That might have been the last time. I mean, that might have been like 2015 or something. Yeah, actual ancient history. But yeah, it is nice to be on the opposite end of it after a very long time for sure. And it is also a valuable learning experience to put myself in the opposite shoes.
I've actually found that magazine, but I've not been able to look in actually read it because like I hovered over with the mouse towards the magazine to open it up, but it just tells me, "Oh, you're not able to do that." Maybe it's because like some sort of issue with connectivity or something like that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, who knows? That is, I mean, yeah, the just I don't know. The fact, yeah, I mean, 2015 Esports E magazine that interviewed me in Sideshow for God knows what reason. I don't know what was going on at the time. I don't know why they picked me in Sideshow. I don't even know if we knew each other yet at the time. It was so long ago. Maybe we did loosely, but yeah, yeah. It's been a while.
and it just goes to show, the depths of my research that I want to go to whenever I'm interested by a person that I want to interview. So, just a heads up, we could have talked about more from that magazine, but such is such is the ways of the internet. Such is the
Yeah.
ways of the internet. Um, Rewinding towards moving your perspective from the past and the present to the future. I believe you mentioned about a little bit about your goals in covering Valorant, but I want to know more in depth about that. What do you view as your ultimate goal in covering Valorant?
My ultimate goal is to do unnamed independent, um, and to be able to, I mean, yeah, to just be able to do that independently. That can be the main thing that I do. I want to, I mean, I want to have the, eventually, I want to cast a wider net as to the people that I'm talking to because I do have, interests outside of Valorant and just talking to people in the wider gaming scene that I think are fascinating people in general. I mean, you mentioned Banny earlier. When I started doing this, he's one of the people that I always want to talk to. I know I'm going to do it eventually, and I can't wait to do it because he is a fascinating person. We have a long history together competing against each other, with each other sometimes. People like that, that I know are captivating people that don't necessarily have to exist in Valorant. But also in Valorant, there is a wealth of um, very interesting people with stories that I want to hear about, and so I think I think that as I slowly continue to do more and more, I want to expand my horizons of guests in that way. But that really is my goal. I mean, I've had that in mind again, just every day since I finished doing the first one with Psycho, I just realized immediately that that is the thing that I am supposed to be doing. I've just that moment of realization after I was done that um the feeling of satisfaction, the passion that I had put into doing that was just totally beyond anything that I had done in so many years. So that is where hopefully my future lies, and of course uh continuing to do Plat Chat until the wheels fall off, basically, which I don't know when that'll be, but that'll just always be fun because I get to do it with my genuine friends. Um, as for anything else in Valorant, I'm kind of just I would just say I'm open minded. But yeah,
Sort of similar. This next question is similar to the previous one that I just asked. Where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
doing unnamed, genuinely doing it, but with doing it with different people. I mean, I want to be able to um have sort of the flexibility and being able to travel around and go to people in different places. I have a lot of ideas of how I want to push it further visually and aesthetically, because currently my mode of operation just renting out just renting studios where the people are located to do it, which was a hit and a miss. I mean, I'm not going to go on too much of a side tangent, but man, the studio that I booked when I did the one with Stellar really, really did me dirty. They produce a lot of podcasts for Bleacher Report, if you're familiar with that
Yep.
outlet, sports outlet, that are extremely high quality, and they decided to phone it in and send me an appalling quality video that I then had to pay someone to color correct and reframe so it could look passable. The original video was shockingly bad. I mean, it was like a three camera setup recording. Each camera had a different white balance. The wide shot was framed so egregiously that it was just unfixable and unusable. And of course, this was in Los Angeles, so I paid out the ass for the studio time,
Mm.
and they just really, yeah, and that will frustrate me to the end of time because I'm so hyper detail focused, and I care so much about it that I will never not be upset about that. But I just have to try and mentally move past it and keep it going. But yeah, god damn, that was annoying. But that is essentially how I have to do it right now until in the future. Hopefully, at some point, I would love to just have someone be able to produce it with me, have my own equipment, be able to travel to people where they are, kind of set it up on the fly, have a visual or a location that is more personal and representative to them and who they are, rather than just booking studios. But one thing at a time. That is my vision for it in the long term, though.
Even so, the video did come out as well as it did, and it sort of makes one not. It sort of just makes it difficult for one to believe that it actually turned out as bad in those videos. But still, such is the way of doing interviews. I mean, it might be bad, but it's on the bright side. One might take it as a lesson learned, and one that they could put to
Definitely.
use for the future. That's for sure.
Definitely. And of course, what's most important is the conversation and people taking something away from that and enjoying that. Of course, that is the core of it. But it is just my hyper detail oriented brain that will never be able to untangle itself from the web of frustration around what happened with that logistically. But I digress. Still, the reception for that was more than I could have asked for in terms of positivity and people's relation to it and connection to it. So that is, of course, what matters the most. But yeah,
Yeah, indeed. And so I think that about wraps up all of my questions for this interview. Wyatt, once again, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this interview. I think we've gone past 2 hours, and it was a very deep and very enjoyable conversation that I had, which I really appreciate it. One more time, and hopefully I could speak to you again in the future, whenever that may be.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I said it 5 minutes ago, but I really appreciate the the thought into the line of questioning and how you approached everything. Does not go without recognition. Yeah, just an excellent job, and um, I appreciate that. I suppose this was or talking to me was worth the effort and the care and the time put into it. That also means a lot in of itself. So yeah, just thank you for having me.
And likewise, and once again, this will be the first of many video interviews I would like to do in the future. I don't know when it's the next edition of of this interview. Might be with a different person, might be someone from another game. We'll see. But in any case, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.